Hi, I'm Chelsea Von Chaz. I'm the founder of the Happy Period organization. My mission with Happy Period is to help you become more comfortable with your period and also more comfortable talking about periods in general. I want to help eliminate that stigma. So I got a couple of my girlfriends together so we can pretty much talk about our experiences with our own periods. We talked about a lot of things that you may not actually know. For example, did you know that mass market menstrual care products are actually cleaned using a cocktail of plastic chemicals? We're talking carbon dioxide, dioxins, pherons, even formaldehyde, acetone. All of this is used to clean out, when I say clean out, your pads and tampons. It's super important for me to share all this information with you, including my girlfriend. So just take a look. We have no idea about this, you know what I mean? Like, and this is going on for years, like decades. And it's pretty insane because, like, you know, we trust a lot of these companies.
Right.
We're so used to, you know, these, brands that have been around for decades, right? Like, you got your Kotex, you got your Tampax, and, you know, and of course, like you said, like, you kind of, like, use them because that's what you were introduced to.
Right.
And you were so comfortable with it, and you don't really think anything of it. You know what I mean? But it's like now in this day and age where it is, like, about being conscious and clean and green and eco-friendly and sustainability, but it's like, how come we're not, like, going full circle with it when it comes to our bodies, you know? And it's super scary because we're always talking about, you know, like, we're so scared about cancers, breast cancer, like ovarian cancer, cervical cancer, and fibroids, and like endometriosis, like all these different things that are, like, these diseases and all these different treatments and everything that's going on with our bodies that were not existing 50 plus years ago. But it's like, so what's the difference? Like, what happened? And I think, like, we look at everything else, like the food that we eat, that is something, the products that we use, like, on the outside as well. But for some reason, like, it's not really clicking with a lot of us when it comes to, like, our periods, you know, and the fact that our vulva is exposed, our vagina is exposed, like, we're putting something up there, and that's in our blood flow, and it gets in our bodies. Like, and it's like, it's just literally just being shoved into the source, right? So, it's super scary. So, you know, I like to let people know more when I see a lot of my friends who, they still use, like, Tampax, Pearl, or whatever, and they're complaining about their cramps. And I'm like, yo, like, but did you know, like, the main reason that you have these cramps, is because
I did not know that.
You're, like, using Tampax Pearl, and all those chemicals are in there, plus there's fragrances, you know what I mean? Like, we're so worried about, like, you know, not smelling bad or not, like, leaking. But we have to really think about, like, what we're putting inside of our bodies on a monthly basis for 5 to 7 days straight.
What do we compromise in that
time? Exactly. You know, and and I've talked to a lot of women who actually admit that when they switched over to something that was better for their body, whether it was a menstrual cup or an organic, you know, pad or tampon company, they stopped having those bad cramps or those bad, like, headaches right before the period started or whatever. So it definitely is linked to that. You know what I mean? I really just, like, want to ask, like, why do you think, what makes you not try something else, I guess?
Well, you brought something up earlier that I thought was interesting, which is trust. And so I think that we look at the world and everything that we are consuming on a daily basis, and you think, okay, well, this company is so large, like, I should be able to trust them because they have been doing this. And you'd assume that, or at least I would assume that, like, they'd adopt some of those organic methods, because I do have so much trust in them. They have so many consumers, that they would sort of switch if that's the way that the world is moving toward.
Exactly. It's like, it's the power of the consumer, right?
Exactly.
Like, we're the ones that's, you know, we're spending our money, we can make the demands, we can, you know, I mean, they're paying attention to us. Like, it's all in the numbers and the data. I think some of them are, but it's not happening fast enough. And it's really going to take someone in charge to just decide, like, because I would assume, like, to recall everything, that would be the end, right? For a lot of them, or it would cost a lot. But for me though, it's like I would rather another person not die or lose their legs, or pass out, or develop some type of cancer because of the products that I essentially like produce or manufacture. You know what I mean? Right. A lot of people don't really know about Lauren Weiser. Or Lauren Wasser, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. But she's a really amazing model, right? And she's a huge advocate for, people who use tampons, or people who have experienced toxic shock syndrome, because that's what she experienced. We hear about toxic shock syndrome, but I think a lot of us either we don't know no one has ever been through that, so it's just kind of like like a mysterious ass thing that could possibly happen. But I think it's a trip, like when it actually happens to you, or or meet someone, or you read about it, and it's just like, wow, you know what I mean? So yeah, with Lauren, like, she basically, she lost her legs from experiencing using a tampon, and having a really crazy, like, health nightmare that she's still dealing with, because she lost one leg, and then another one I think a year or so like after that.
She was young, right?
She was super young. She was like, I think she was 24 when the first big reaction happened. And she admitted to using a tampon. She was using a tampon, and something just happened where she passed out and was in the hospital, and they didn't know what was wrong with her. Like, that was the kind of the last thing that they asked her, like, like, what products do you use, like, are you still on your period, how long have you been on your period, you know what I mean? And unfortunately, like, the worst case, and it's completely changed her life, I'm sure. I've heard and read a few other stories about women who have actually died from that, you know what I mean? Especially young girls, when they're transitioning from a pad into a tampon, and then they don't really know, like, to keep it in, for less than 6 to 8 hours. Nobody's really telling them, and then on top of that, nobody's really telling us about the chemicals that's in it, or really educating us about it. So I think with Lauren, like, she's pretty tight, because she's really advocating for the companies to actually, like, put it on the label, you know what I mean? What are the ingredients that are in this? And like, put a warning label on it as far as, like, how much time the person should be using this for. Like, it's super important, It's really crazy. I was curious to know who exactly introduced my girlfriends to tampons. I mean, many of us, when we first started our periods, we had to use a pad, right? So, I mean, I'm curious, when did you make the transition from a pad to a tampon?
I got my period when I was 10. I was the first one of all of my friends. And I definitely did not try a tampon until I was like maybe 16, and that was
high school for sure.
And I hid it, like, I didn't tell, like, my mom. I remember trying to insert it, and I didn't know how to. And I remember crying because I thought something was wrong with me. And my parents, like, our family is very loving, but that was something that was not okay to talk about or experiment with, because of just culturally it wasn't okay. It just wasn't okay.
Man, I hear you. Do you feel like it's kind of the same thing for you?
I agree. I mean, I started my period when I was 12, and it was the exact same thing. I hid it from my mom. Actually, my cousin, bless her soul, she helped me put in my first tampon. Like,
really?
Was it Liz? It was Alyssa. Oh. And she was all in there. She had a mirror and everything. She's like, I'll show you how to do it.
I didn't know this.
The first time, though, it still went in the wrong way, and much pain happened, was caused after that. But, I mean, I think in our whole family, it was kind of the same way, which is why she understood the need to, like, we need to do this secretly in the bathroom and just experiment with this thing. And ever since then, I mean, it's been, I mean, our mom knows now, obviously. But
I'm trying to remember, like, my whole thing with the tampon, because I got my period when I was 10. I was equipped, like, prepared for it. Like, I had my period talk Mm-hmm. And so I was introduced to pads, and I was like, okay, this is fine. This is basic. It's literally a freaking diaper. Yes. This sucks.
Maybe with wings, maybe not.
Yeah, no wings or not. I think I started using like Stay Fresh or Stay Free or something like
always.
That. Carefree, I don't know, always, probably.
Maybe all.
And then, right?
You've gone through the gamut.
Like, you know which one works for you.
Yeah.
Like it's very specific.
I think I was an always girl. I think so. Yeah. But I don't remember. I feel like someone else outside of my family introduced me to a tampon, though. Like, it was a girlfriend, like a friend or something in middle school or high school even. I don't remember. But I was just like, I see the point of this. Like, it's convenient, but I don't really like the plugging up part.
Yeah, you feel like it's like unnatural in a way.
Yeah, that to me it felt unnatural because I was like, wait, there has to be like residue, right? Like there has to be something else going on. Like I was silly to think this even at that age.
Naturally you were
like,
but
I was like, no, this just needs to be out. Let's just get this out. Just
within our conversation, the fact that we're, like, for a convenience factor, I think a lot of people use tampons, right?
Yeah.
And so if we're going to have our girls, like, younger girls, like, transition over to it, the other piece of it is, like, we're willingly now allowing them to use tampons, and all those chemicals you talked about are now going to be, like, touching, I think you said this, their bloodstream, and they're inside of them for 6 hours.
Exactly.
And then, like, we're expecting them to have the responsibility to know when to take it out. And so maybe that's a conversation, too, as to whether or
10,
not...
11, 12 years old. That's crazy.
Like...
Exactly. Yeah. And then, of course, like, we get busy. Like, even as grown women, like...
I've let mine in longer than I should have before, for sure. Like, fell asleep and then, like, woke up the next morning was like, oh, my God.
And they tell you, like... Nobody really tells you, like, no, don't go to bed with a tampon in. You know what I mean? Right. Like, a lot of people, they just assume, like, oh, no, this is fine. You go about your day and you just forget. I mean, I know some people, they can forget, like, wait, did I take the first one out or did I not?
Yes.
And you just get, if you're stressed out, if you're busy, if you have cramps, if you're exhausted because you're on your period, because you're literally, like, bleeding, like, all of these things.
And it just becomes routine, especially if you're doing it throughout the day.
And then if it doesn't happen the first time, you're like, okay, it's okay. Like, it's okay if I forgot it the second time or whatever. And you start to build habits.
What about the stigma that's with that? Like, just, because I think everybody starts off with a pad, right? And then you transition gradually or something. You have an aha moment, I don't know, and you just, now it's the tampon. But a lot of people, they experience, like, some type of stigma with that. Like, it's bad. I've definitely heard people tell me that they didn't use a tampon because their mom or somebody said that, you'll get pregnant or you won't be a virgin anymore or something.
The looser, not looser in that way, but like this, like, I hate to use the word, but like the slutty girls, like the fast girls, they're the ones who use tampons.
Use the tampons,
When that's definitely not
to trick you not into using it.
But then,
I mean, we have the same mom, so.
And we grew up, like, 1st grade through 8th grade, we're in, like, religious parochial school, and so there was a very, there's definitely a tie, that piece of it was definitely, like, ingrained in us. Like, we were not allowed to use tampons. We're not supposed to use tampons.
I mean, even now, my niece and her friend, she was the first of all of her friends to get her period, and just, like, talking to her mom about it, and she's like, no, I don't want her to use a tampon until she's old enough. And I'm like, well, what does that really mean? And it's just this association of sex, and
the insertion somehow is linked to
the idea of sex, which is, I think, coming from, how we grew up, I can understand to a certain extent, but I also think that, like, how do we care for our bodies? Is using a tampon truly bad for you? And yes, I think with the chemicals that you shared about, yes, but I think that's associated to shame and how we think about what our period is. I mean, she was crying to me about this, you know?
That's a trip. And I think it's also, like, a cultural thing, too.
For sure.
Because I know for sure, well, I know about y'all, but I can definitely say that in my experience of doing this work and knowing so many women and talking to so many women about their periods and products. So for me, it looks like women of color, like, we're cool with the basics, like the traditional, use of whether it's a pad and it's reusable, like cloth pads, or regular disposable pads. And then it's like tampons, we're kind of like, sure, it's convenient, but that's not every day. And then we'll even like use liners. Like we're big on liners too. Like liners is good for like swimsuits when we're not on our period. We're definitely using them when we are on our period. And then I find like way more white women talk about like how they introduce their daughters to tampons like earlier, or they're more open to their daughters use tampons because to them, when they transitioned into using them, they thought it was like the best thing since sliced bread or some shit. And then so they're more open to like giving them kind of more of the option. And then it's like, I don't really, and it may not really necessarily, and it's just from my experience, because I'm just looking at it from a cultural perspective, because I think a lot of people just don't. Yeah. And then I was going to say, like, it seems like a lot of folks that I know, and like in my generation, or our generation, where it's like they felt low-key cheated because their parent did not tell them about a tampon never told them. Or like they had to discover it like somewhere else, and they're like, well, why didn't you tell me? And they're they didn't really get an answer. So and I always tell them like, well, maybe it was also because like your mom or auntie or whoever like were actually more aware of the bad, harmful things that came with tampon usage versus this more of a safety of using a pad. Right. You know what I mean? Which kind of still goes back to like with the chemicals, and then also like toxic shock syndrome, like that being so you being so vulnerable to that just from using a tampon. So that's the huge, that's a big difference, right? But I mean, unfortunately though, like when it comes to pad or tampon liner, like a lot of these products are just not clean, and I think that's the messed up part about it.
And I think that we're like more often now I see people trying to experiment in outside of the box, because like Ariel was saying earlier, like she trusts these companies because they've been around forever and ever. But I'm in a different space where I'm like, that company's been around forever and ever, which means they've made a ton of money, which means they're going to keep doing what they need to do, and they're not necessarily concerned with creating a better product, even if they're aware that their product might be harmful. And I think that we've seen that as consumers, especially over the last 10 years with the rise of social media as well. Yes. We've seen more like articles come out about something not being good for you, whether it's a Netflix documentary that's like heavily biased and slighted in one way, and you can tell. Exactly. Or it's something legit where, like for deodorant, for example, I brought that up. Like I'm struggling right now. I'm trying to find like a really good natural one that I'm not allergic to. But, even that, I'm like, you know what? All of the things that I've heard about it, and, whether there are studies that say it's linked, there are studies that say it's not linked, I'm still going to try and go down this path. Right. And so, like you've brought up using like menstrual cup before. For me, that was outside of my scope. But now I'm like, I really want to try and use it and just see if that's something that's going to work for me.
Right.
But going back to the conversation earlier as well about why like some girls weren't introduced by their parents. Like I definitely would love our mom, but like it was definitely not because she was aware of chemicals that were in it. I'm 100% sure it was more of the stigma culturally of like young girls potentially being faster if they were inserting and aware of. And there's just this weird cultural thing I think as well of like wanting to hide certain aspects of like being comfortable with our sexuality.